After the entire royal family was slaughtered, rightfully if I may add, there was no one in the Syracusan nobility that wanted to support Carthage in the war. However, the people who are never smart were very much pro-Punic. So they elected Hippocrates and Epycides as archons for the city. The Syracusan Senate thought they came up with something clever and very update-worthy when they gave the Punic brothers 4,000 men each and sent them out to defend the frontier. Their thinking was that the brothers were effectively tricked into leaving Syracuse and would cause no problems anymore. They forgot that you cannot out-trick a pune. Meanwhile, Consul Marcellus arrived in Sicily and was ready to leave nothing vertical on the island. The only thing stopping him was a plea from the Syracusan Senate that alleged that everything was under control, patriots were in charge, and to trust the plan. Marcellus reported back to Rome that a great deal was being made, perhaps the best deal, and that the Strait of Messana would soon open. However, while Marcellus and the Syracusan Senate were working on a deal that would avoid complete destruction of Syracuse, and perhaps even bring it back to the Roman side, the Hippocrates was busy raiding Roman allied villages around Leontini. The Senate thought that they found the final solution to the Hippocrates question by sending him away from the city. But in reality, they ended up sabotaging themselves by giving the Punic brothers free reign over anything outside of Syracuse. And now, Hippocrates was openly fucking with the peace deal. However, Marcellus uncharacteristically declared that this does not break the ceasefire, actually. He only asked Appius Pulcher, the praetor of the province, to garrison some troops in these allied villages and to stand back and stand by. Hippocrates then doubled down and killed the Roman guards as well. While this was happening, his brother Epycides went to the people of Leontini and straight up lied to them. He said that the deal that was being negotiated between Romans and Syracusans included a clause that would allow Syracuse to wholly take over Leontini. The populace of that town, much like the populace of any other town, or let's be honest, the populace of the world, was overwhelmingly stupid. So they fell for it. They accepted Epycides as their leader and started supporting Hippocrates' raids against the Romans. Marcellus was done waiting. He set off for Leontini with his army, intent on taking Hippocrates and Epycides out of the picture. That being said, though, the brothers, despite this rash action from Marcellus, failed in their plot to sabotage the peace treaty, as the Syracusan Senate agreed to also send an army against Leontini to help Marcellus take over it, under the condition that later the town would be theirs. So Epycides basically manifested this clause of the deal into reality. Appius Pulcher was also called towards Leontini, so now 3 armies were about to besiege the town. Seeing the overwhelming force descending upon them, the Punic brothers simply abandoned the walls with their small armies and ran away before anyone got to them. Appius' men and Marcellus' men were so enraged by the killing of their friends by Carthaginian raiding parties that they took Leontini after a single assault. Not that it would have been hard to do so, mind you, because as I said, Hippocrates and Epycides abandoned the town. Leontini, one could argue, didn't do nothing, except fall for Punic tricks, which, to be fair, is a horrible sin, and now they would suffer for it. Marcellus and Appius would rip the town apart, allowing their legions to feast upon the remains of its wealth. Allegedly, that is. The only source we have for this story, much like many other stories about the Second Punic War, is Livius. And Livius says that the sacking of Leontini was a lie made up by Hippocrates. Now, a redditor would say that, of course Livius would say that, he was le biased. But, as we've seen before, Livius doesn't shy away from mentioning any Roman or pro-Roman brutality. He hardly ever tries to even justify it. At most, maybe he tries to obfuscate. So why would he start straight up lying now? That being said, and it is being said, we are talking about Marcellus here, the father of death. So it wouldn't really be surprising if Leontini was actually sacked. Anyway, despite our character building that we've done in our previous episodes, I'm going to go ahead and believe Livius and say that Carthaginians did actually make it up. Meanwhile, the Syracusan army was on its way towards Leontini when a courier, supposedly from the town itself, but in reality from Hippocrates' army, went up to them and, feigning a moral outrage, declared that the bloodthirsty Romans had destroyed Leontini and enslaved its Greek population. The Syracusans, well, fell for it, and the outraged army refused to march any further to help the Romans. Their generals decided to take the 8,000-strong army back to the city. However, who would they bump into on their way? That's right, not only Hippocrates, but also Epycides themselves. The Carthaginians first happened upon the vanguard of the army, who were Cretans. These Cretans, or some would brazenly say Cretans, had served under the brothers while Hieronymus was alive, and before that they had been captured and then mercilessly released by Hannibal at Trasimene. This time Hannibal's past virtue signaling actually paid off, as the brothers easily convinced the Cretans to join them. Then more and more men arrived from the column, and saw Hippocrates, under whom they had served before. They started sawing out, and joined up with the brothers as well. Eventually the generals of the army arrived, and not being able to read the room, foolishly ordered Hippocrates and Epycides arrested. They were obviously laughed at and had many red rotten tomatoes thrown at them. They could do nothing but order their remaining soldiers to fall back and set up camp elsewhere. The brothers then came up with another mischievous, devilish trick, impish even. You see, a substantial part of the Syracusan army were mercenaries from other Greek hells. The brothers decided to play on this. A random messenger ran into the camp of the loyalist army and very loudly read out a completely legitimate and not a made-up message from the Syracusan Senate that said, "The complete destruction of Leontini was cool and good. So now we wish that Marcellus would also kill mercenaries from other Greek cities that we have in our army. That would be great and funny, we think." T. The Syracusan Senate. Be not surprised, dear viewers, when I tell you that this message made every mercenary clique in the camp leak and mutiny. They gathered all native Syracusans in the camp and were going to put them to death. But at this point, Hippocrates and Epycides intervened and stopped this horrible act. Obviously not because they were particularly merciful, but because this would earn them readied upvotes of not only the soldiers, but their families back in Syracuse as well. After taking over this army, the brothers now sent another messenger, and this time to Syracuse. Once arriving, he spread lies about Romans absolutely backbreaking Leontini and its population. The city was stricken with such panic that even some senators were persuaded to abandon a treaty with the Romans. Syracuse went into lockdown and refused any negotiations with anyone. So with just a few lies, the brothers won themselves a battle, an army, and sabotaged the negotiations without spilling a single drop of blood. Maybe a little child sacrifice here and there, but who counts those, am I right? So it has to be said, and they have to be given credit here, they were quite the little impish devils. Anyway, the dividends of their tricks do not end here. Once with their army they made their way up to the gate of Syracuse, named the Hexapilon, so called because there were, wait for it, 6 of them. They got in contact with the families of the soldiers whose lives they had just so magnanimously saved, and got them to open the gates from inside. All 6 of them, in fact. The Syracusan authorities arrived and sneered at this development, but no one listened to them, after which they started threatening the people. But still, no Phono cared. Then they started begging the people to close the fucking doors. This display of door-cocking was so pathetic that the population simply just turned around and slaughtered the entire Senate. Only a few managed to escape. Now, Hippocrates and Epycides officially became tyrants of the city. Eventually, Marcellus heard all of this and decided that the Syracusans were incapable of governing themselves and once and for all needed to be destroyed. At the end of 214 BC, Marcellus and Appius started setting up a siege camp around the town of Syracuse. Aside from the Siege of Syracuse and the general going-ons and not going-ons of Sicily, 213 BC would be a nothing burger year. So before we go back to Syracuse, let's quickly go over the nothings that happened on the other fronts of the war. Sticking to the aforementioned theme of the year, the elections for the consuls of 213 BC will be held without a scandal. Fabius Maximus would preside once more over them, and this time the people would elect his son Fabius Minimus and our very best friend Tiberius Gracchus as consuls. Tiberius, taking a note from Fabius's book, would do absolutely nothing other than sitting around in Lucania for the entire year. Well, I guess he did accept the defection of 100 or so Capuan horsemen, who only went to him because he had a name of being a tolerant, compassionate, decent human being, or something. Fabius Minimus, on the other hand, would uncharacteristically do something. He was assigned the region of Apulia, where his legions had operated in 214 BC, while he was still a praetor. His main goal for this year would be the town of Arpi, first of the big Italian communities that had switched over to Hannibal, after having their cliti quiver when the one-eyed Pune won the Battle of Cannae. Arpi was very important for Hannibal, as it provided safe winter quarters for him and was a significant logistics hub for his Italian shenanigans. However, it was no easy prize, as Hannibal had garrisoned 5,000 troops in the city, alongside 3,000 local Italian allies. On his endeavor to do something, Fabius Minimus would be aided by, surprisingly, Fabius Maximus. You heard that right. And you thought this would be a nothing burger year, didn't you? Maximus joined his son's legion as a mere legate, as at first his plan was to do, well, nothing, but this would soon change. When Maximus arrived at the new consul's camp, everyone was stunned by His Excellency, the Delayer, or the Edger if you will, showing up so randomly. Then he made his way towards Junior. Everyone was frozen. Even the lictors who are supposed to safeguard the consul from absolutely everyone were literally shaking, so to speak. Fabius passed 11 of his son's 12 lictors without anyone trying to stop him, until Junior himself shook awake the last lictor, who came to his senses and stopped the father, demanding that he dismount immediately. Maximus quickly jumped off the horse, embraced his son, and said, "My son, I just wanted to see that you were fully aware that you are the consul now." The Fabii shared this wholesome epic Reddit Chungus moment together and hugged. Then they happily made their way inside of the new consul's tent. There, a most natural of occurrences, a Shitalian of impish character by the name of Tacius Altinius awaited his judgment. You see, he had just arrived at the Roman camp a night before, with promises of betraying Arpi to the Romans, if given a worthy enough prize, of course. As is frequent with italics, Tacius had previously betrayed Rome after Cannae, and was the one who gave the keys of Arpi to Hannibal. Now he was promising the same keys to the Romans. Because of his tendency of treachery, Fabius Minimus's advisors and legates were all urging him to ignore the man and at most put him to death for his previous desertion. They argued that doing nothing and sitting outside of Arpi would eventually somehow force the town to go back to Rome. All were in agreement about this, including Junior himself, until a voice spoke out and urged action. "Comrades, peers and friends, you allow your ideas to run wild. Yes, you may choose the path of punishment for this man, and it indeed would be well deserved. But reprimanding him now, at this moment, you would not be punishing his treachery to Rome, but rather his treachery to Hannibal. What message would we be sending to our stray Italian friends who at this moment are thinking of coming back to our embrace? That instead of accepting their penance, we shall meet it with wrath? No. I think not. I suggest that we take the information that this man offers to give us and do something with it." 1,000 jaws hit the floor as soon as Fabius Senior finished his speech. No words left the mouths that were so agape, but silence itself communicated one thing and one thing only. It would be as Maximus says. Altinius was sent to a villa and placed under house arrest. He was promised a pardon once the war was over. Hearing this, he provided the following information to the consul. The strongest parts of Arpi's walls were the least guarded both day and night. Very valuable information right there, I know, but it is what it is. Surprisingly, or perhaps not, the big Nibal himself would be happy by Altinius' defection, owing to the fact that now he could confiscate and then sell off the vast amounts of property that the men owned all around Apulia. But, just for good measure, he ordered that Altinius' wife and children be burned alive. Be warned, though, that this part of the story could absolutely be made up by Livius. But hey, it fits our narrative, right? So let's go with it. While Hannibal was busy enjoying a child getting roasted, Fabius Minimus ordered his men to scale the most defended parts of Arpi's walls at night. What made his maneuver even more likely to succeed was the fact that a huge rainstorm had come, and what scarce guards were usually at the walls had at first taken shelter and then fallen asleep due to the calming nature of rain. The 600 men that snuck onto the town walls quickly opened the gate for the consul and the rest of his army. They made their way inside and started taking over the settlement. The guards finally awoke and sounded the alarm. The Carthaginian garrison intended to use their Italian allies as meat shields, so they forced them out into the streets to stop the Roman advance, while they made their way into the citadel. However, the Italians and the Romans recognized each other, and instead of fighting, started talking amongst each other. By dawn, no blood had been shed, and the 3,000 Italians who were garrisoning Arpi had switched over to the Romans. In short, nothing ever happened. The nothingness of this whole situation was exacerbated by the fact that Fabius Jr. negotiated with the 5,000 Carthaginians who were holding the citadel and then subsequently let them go without any more bloodshed. After the successful takeover of Arpi had finished, Fabius Minimus had used up all the resources for activity that were in the gens Fabia. The family would then take a backseat in Roman politics for the next few hundred years, only rarely showing up as background characters here and there. This being exemplified by Fabius Jr. himself, who would do absolutely nothing for the remainder of not only his consulship in 213 BC, but basically for the rest of his life, making his dad a very, very proud man. On the other side of the Adriatic, Philip finally managed to get off his ass and took over a whopping amount of one town while starting a siege for another. The praetor Marcus Valerius, who was in Brundisium with his fleet and was tasked with controlling Philip, quickly rushed over, recaptured that one town, and attacked Philip's siege camp at night. The Macedonians were so lackluster that the Romans almost got to Philip's tent before the Greeks realized something was happening and raised the alarm. Philip, the king mind you, had to flee the camp in his underwear and skulk back to his pike hill called Macedon, while ordering the remainder of his men to burn down his fleet so the Romans couldn't capture it. Over to Spain, the Carthaginians were occupied with relentless and endless rebellions instigated by their embarrassing defeat to the Scipii brothers at Hibera. While Gnaeus and Publius themselves were still incapable of advancing, they soon found an opportunity to open up yet another front of this war that already spanned half the Mediterranean. Numidia was a Carthaginian vassal state. They were an extremely important ally to the Punics. In fact, we all know today, and it must have been apparent back then as well, that it was the Numidian cavalry that carried the Carthaginian army. The Punic forces were made up of many golems from many nations, but all of them routinely got backbroken by Roman infantry, be they Gauls, Spaniards, Italians, or Libyans even. Now, Numidians, on the other hand, were the biggest, strongest, horsiest, brownest golems that the Carthaginians could get their hands on, and they routinely BTFO'd Roman cavalry, sometimes even infantry by the way, or entire skirmishing forces, and eventually consuls as well, but we'll get to that later. The problem with this, however, was that Numidia was not an unified entity. It hosted many autonomous kingdoms on its territory, mainly two, the Massasusasuli and the Massasusicily, or whatever. The Eastern Kingdom, ruled by King Galla, was figuratively and literally closer to Carthage, and therefore was more loyal, urbanized, and had tighter economic cultural ties with the Punic city. The Western Kingdom, on the other hand, under the leadership of Syphax, was much bigger, much more rural, and much less interested in the politics of Carthage. However, Syphax was interested in taking over all of Numidia. As Galla and his kingdom were directly under Carthaginian protection, this meant that Punics were in Syphax's way. So the somewhat young king made contact with Scipios and asked them for assistance. The pragmatic Scipios saw a chance to not only acquire a new ally, but to take away Carthage's strongest asset, the Numidian cavalry. In return, Syphax asked for only one thing: a centurion to train his infantrymen in the art of Roman warfare. This centurion would be Quintus Statorius. Now, if you think about it, and let us do indeed think about it, Numidians already had the best cavalry in the Mediterranean, if not the world, since Satan hadn't invented the Mongols yet, thus giving the Berbers the training of a Roman legion was risky, as at the very least they'd know the organizational structure of the best infantry force in the world. What if Syphax decided to wage war against Rome after Carthage? What if he switched back to Punics? Who am I kidding? The barbarians clearly can't learn complex formations, right? Yes, Statorius tried his best to teach Numidians the art of the drill, but as soon as Galla sent his son Massinissa against western Numidia, Syphax suffered a catastrophic defeat and lost 30,000 men. The North African king had to retreat even deeper into Berber hell, this time into Mauritania, where he started a guerrilla campaign against Massinissa, who was pursuing him, thus somewhat fulfilling the hopes of the Scipii brothers by maintaining a small hotspot in Africa, but nothing serious. Statorius would periodically go back and forth between Spain and Africa to train more Numidians. By the way, if you're ever wondering, this is why Rome Total War has Numidian legionaries in the Numidian unit roster. Although visually they look like post-Marian reform soldiers, but hey, it is something, right? The Siege of Syracuse did not go as planned. The naval assault from Marcellus and the land assault towards the Hexapillon led by Appius Pulcher both failed with huge casualties, all thanks to the unquenched autism of one man, Archimedes. Archimedes had been Hero's top guy for 50 years. He was the king's go-to guy. He was the guy that the king went to when he needed a problem solved. Hero said that Archimedes was such an intellectual beast, dude. He was such an intellectual beast, man. He was such an intellectual nasty beast right now that he put him in charge of the city's defenses. Archimedes replied that he would go to bat for Hero and set up the most autistic defenses for any city in the ancient world. For example, the citadel in the port had pre-sighted mangonels, catapults and ballistas that accurately hit anything at almost any range. If a ship was in sight, it could and would be hit, and Marcellus experienced that firsthand. But the true testament of Archimedes' autism is the fact that he went up against Roman autism and triumphed. You see, Marcellus had noticed the inherent difficulty associated with assaulting walls from the sea, so he ordered the construction of sambucas. These were essentially two quinquiremes that had been slapped together and basically had a siege tower glued on top of them. You see, kids, in the real world this would be called rigging.
but since we're not allowed to have fun on this platform and in the current year, we'll just call it out-of-the-box thinking for now. Anyway, you gotta respect the unyielding Roman attempt to turn naval warfare into ground warfare. Corvus also comes to mind as another example. During the battle, some Sambucas still made it past the artillery kill zone, and were under the minimum range of the Syracusan catapults. However, Archimedes had prepared for this as well. He had set up what we now know as cranes today, but must have been equivalent to a mech back then. These cranes held huge rocks and boulders that they would drop onto the enemy ships with pinpoint accuracy. Other contraptions included claws that would scoop out Roman ships from the sea and drop them back in from higher altitudes. Now over to the hexapilon, Archimedes had dug little palm-sized holes in the walls. When Roman maniples got close enough to the walls that the archers couldn't shoot at them anymore, these holes were opened up and the scorpions that were installed inside started shooting iron darts at the legionaries. Additionally, the aforementioned claws and mechs would also be utilized near the hexapilon. In the battle, Archimedes had dealt such a huge blow to the Romans that both Pulcher and Marcellus decided to never try a direct assault on the city again. The proconsul, however, wanted his blood and death, so he set out on a punitive mission. He was going to kill Greeks whether they liked it or not. He left Appius in charge of the blockade with 2/3 of the army, and made his way into mainland Sicily with the remaining 1/3. He first approached the towns of Helorus and Herbessus, the populations of which, much to Marcellus's dismay, nay, chagrin even, willingly surrendered. The town of Megara, on the other hand, resisted, and thus relieved the consul of his blue balls by giving him an excuse to kill everything in his sight. Which he did, obviously. Despite this very righteous terror campaign that the proconsul had so honorably taken up, the Greek cities on the island, especially Syracuse of course, remained steadfast in their resistance. The reason for this was not the successful defense of the city, but rather the arrival of the fleet and army of Himilco, a Carthaginian general who was in charge of 25,000 infantry, 3,000 cavalry, and 12 elephants. A very valid, affirming even sized army. Considering that the Carthaginian Senate only allowed the mustering of 20,000 men to reinforce Hannibal in Italy a few years back. But then sent this army to Spain instead. But the point is, the Carthaginian Senate was going all in on Syracuse, not knowing the ultimate truth that nothing ever happens. After disembarking on the shores of Sicily, near Heraclea even, Himilco made his way towards Agrigentum, or Akragas to then name it. This town, some would argue, was the second most important Greekoid colony on the island, so at the very least it held symbolic importance, if not a strategic one. So Marcellus rode out with his 10 to 15,000 strong army to help defend the colony. But on the way there, he was slowed down by rebellions led by literally random villages, so Himilco got to the town faster. Without the fortifications that Akragas would provide Marcellus, he was at a disadvantage, with only 1/3 of an army against the Carthaginian and his 25,000 golems. The proconsul rushed back towards Appius, but he would find something, or rather someone, much better on his way to the praetor. The Syracusans, or rather Epycides and Hippocrates, satisfied with their defense of the city and the arrival of Himilco to the island, got cocky and decided to win their campaign on the field rather than behind the walls of a city. And so Hippocrates left the town at night with 10,000 men and made his way towards Himilco to join up with him. This underappreciation of Archimedes' work would not go unpunished, however, as the half-Pune, half-Greek mischievous, impish devil would finally run out of luck and run face-first into Marcellus' retreating army. A tiny, white string of excitement drizzled down Marcellus' left thigh when he was informed of the oblivious Syracusan army encamped just a few kilometers away from the Roman legions. Without hesitation, he gave the order of total Greek death, upon which Hippocrates' entire army was annihilated, with only a few hundred horsemen managing to escape, including the half-breed himself, unfortunately. Hippocrates did eventually link up with Himilco with the remainder of his army, and the both of them made their way towards Syracuse. Marcellus too returned to the siege camp and prepared for the upcoming battle, now with his full army and Appius at his side. However, the all-inness of the Carthaginian maneuver was not confined to an overland expedition, as another child-sacrificing deviant named Bomilcar soon showed up on the shores of Sicily with 55 warships. The Carthaginian advantage might have been overwhelming if not for the arrival of 30 extra quinqueremes from Italy that brought with them a new legion even. Himilco tried and failed to intercept this new force, because Appius, who was the praetor and now the propraetor of Sicily, had spent more than enough time on the island to know the roads and the not roads better than the general of the Punic expeditionary force. Volker successfully guided the new legion into the siege camp. The armies were now roughly the same size, while on the sea, Romans now hardcore mogged the Carthaginians, who were now technically ship cells because they were outnumbered 2-1. Bomilcar realized his situation and fucked off back to Africa. However, Himilco, on the other hand, doubled down and started going after Roman allied towns in Sicily. Murgantia was one such town, and it served as a supply hub for the Roman siege camp, and so held a sizable garrison, which were all promptly slaughtered by its gross Greek inhabitants and the supplies delivered to Himilco. As is natural for parasites, the Greeks now viewed Himilco as a bigger authority than Marcellus, so other towns did the same and followed the steps of Murgantia. They either ended up slaughtering the local Roman garrison or very nicely expelling them from the city, after which they were obviously slaughtered by the Carthaginians. Very nicely, of course. Joining this unending stream of treachery would be the town of Henna, which was under the command of a certain Lucius Pinarius, who was most probably Italian judging from his last name. But unlike the statistical Italian, he was a loyal soldier of Rome, and an ardent follower of Marcellus's philosophy, aka total blank death, a space which at this moment was filled with the word Greek. The senators of Henna approached Lucius and at first tried to bribe him, but when that didn't work, they tried their usual snake-like persuasion, saying things like, "We are allied to Rome as equals and not as slaves, so if we ask for the keys to the city, the Romans must give it back to us." To which Lucius replied that the source of his authority was not a mere paper on which some words of alliance were scribbled, nor was the source of his authority the whims of some Greekoids in Henna, but rather the source of his authority was his commander, Marcus Claudius Marcellus. He also reminded the Greeks that the only thing that makes humans truly equal is not a piece of paper, but rather death, after which he ordered the entire population of the city slaughtered. Casilinum style, one might even say. Aside from being a very wholesome and valid move, this unfortunately caused some shocks across the island of Sicily. Apparently, Henna was an important town to the Greeks because some Greek whore god got raped there by a Greek men whore god or something. Who cares? Point is, the news spread in less than a day, and the entire island was in uproar. However, when the news reached the proconsul, Marcellus, and I quote, did not object to what had happened, and in fact, ceded the spoils of Henna to the rank and file. What can I say except zeist? Perhaps neist even, although that is up to your interpretation, dear viewer. The Greek spurgout, or a chimp out if you will, but I will, allowed Hippocrates to rebuild his army from the now vengeful Greeks. But summer was coming to a close and the campaigning season had ended. Both Himilco and Hippocrates set up their winter quarters and started waiting for the next year. Marcellus too moved his siege camp 5 kilometers away from the Hexapilon, while Appius Pulcher went back to Rome to stand for election as a consul for 212 BC. Eventually, the winter came and brought with it the end of the year 213 BC. All in all, a nothing burger year. But this transitional year would serve as a calm before the storm, as 212 would be a year of tragedy for both mankind and for us, Soitinks, as well. As soon we will have to say that most hardest of words to utter, goodbye.